Welcome, everybody, to this special live panel discussion in recognition of the launch of our new digital exhibit about trans plus oral histories called Word of Mouth. I'm so glad that you could join us today. My name is Aaron DeVore. I'm the founder of the Chair in Transgender Studies and the Transgender Archives and the Moving Trans History Forward conferences and your host for today's discussion. So we acknowledge with respect the Wakangan people on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. This is the world's first and at this point only chair in transgender studies, and we work to provide inspiration and hope to trans people and to our allies everywhere around the world. And we contribute to the development and communication of accurate, research-based, real-world knowledge about trans plus people. And our hope is that it can be used to build better policies, to better laws, and to drive social change. Also part of our mission is that we help to build strong and resilient trans plus social and cultural communities, and also to support individual well-being by facilitating arts, cultural, and social activities. And in all that we do, we are committed to applying an intersectional lens in our work to advance reconciliation, racial justice, equity, and inclusion for all. We help to manage the world's largest transgender archives. We run the interdisciplinary, international, and intergenerational biennial Moving Trans History Forward conferences. Next one is coming up March 30th to April 2nd, 2023. And we're put out a call for papers, and registration is not quite open yet, but if you're interested in participating, please do. We also run a variety of scholarships for UVic students. We provide fellowships for visitors and, as I mentioned before, arts and cultural events. So we're all over the web. We have several web pages. We're active on social media, and we have a newsletter. Please sign up if you haven't already done so. To the event of the day, Word of Mouth is a digital exhibit that tells the story of how some trans plus communities and networks developed in North America in the latter half of the 20th century. It's based on oral history interviews that were part of the Trans Activism Oral History Project, which was an initiative of the LGBTQ Oral History Digital Collaboratory, which was established by Professor Elspeth Brown at the University of Toronto. Full oral histories that the Word of Mouth exhibit is contextualized and based on are housed at the Transgender Archives here at UVic and at the archives in Toronto, and they're available everywhere through the Word of Mouth digital exhibit. So many people have worked together to make this digital exhibit that we're launching today. You can find a complete list on the About page of the exhibit. I want to say a special thank you to Amelia Smith, our digital exhibit designer, who designed the exhibit's framework, structured dynamic content, and wrote engaging narrative, and who suggested the title, Word of Mouth. Also, thank you to Michael Radmacher and Jay Watts, who worked through multiple revisions and myriad details to bring us the amazing exhibit that we have today. So this is the launch of that exhibit. Please go and look at it in more detail. The Trans Activism Oral History Project, which is the core of this exhibit, includes 17 interviews with trans activists, and those interviews average about 3 hours in length. Because these oral historians tell us just a small slice of trans plus history, we've organized this online panel presentation to tell additional stories so that you and future generations can learn from a more diverse group of trans plus activists and of their experiences. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to play a short 7-minute video that briefly introduces the stories that you'll find in Word of Mouth. Just a little tiny clips from each of the 17 interviews. As I said before, they're very long, but this is just to give you a flavor, a taste of it. So please enjoy this video.
One of the big things I found is that people straight society said, oh, well, there's not many of you.
Everybody who I interviewed said, I've never talked to anybody about this before. It was this big underground thing that was happening that nobody knew anything about.
All I was looking for was answers for myself. I had no particular desire or idea of being an activist.
I had realized that something was doable back when the Jorgensen case broke in '53.
I was 12 when Christine Jorgensen's story hit the headlines, and my only wonder was, gee, there are people who feel that way, only they're the opposite. I wonder if they do these kind of surgeries for people like me.
And not being able to find any information meant that there were a whole lot of other people out there like me that couldn't have any information, and I just couldn't walk away from it.
When I was trying to find anything, the only real source that I found was in the adult bookstore. You would stumble on an article in one of these drag magazines about a function or a party or a convention.
There was literally no role models, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
It's all about survival. We could meet, but we had to meet secretly.
Everybody was really super worried about confidentiality. The locations of meetings were not publicly available. Nobody published their whole name. Everybody went by just an initial and a last name, or just two initials, or their first name and a last initial.
You can be assisted by hearing from folk who have had to find places in the culture which were not initially permitted to them.
I began writing to Mario Martino. I also got in contact with Rupert Raj. Just the three of us in those years were the only people who were out and open and really in the FTM community known enough for other people to contact.
I'd met Lou Sullivan, so I knew he was like the only gay trans man I knew about.
He founded an organization called FTM International. He communicated with people by mail.
I was in the lesbian community originally for 10 years, and I didn't identify as a lesbian, though. I identified as Stone Butch. After I met Lou Sullivan, I knew that I was a transgender man.
And he wrote all day, every day, it seemed like. He was constantly communicating with people.
He had asked me a week before he died to take over his newsletter. I'm having to produce this thing, and I'm having to think about this, and I'm getting communication from all these people, and I'm thinking, we have to be public. We cannot be so closeted. We will never get our needs met. We will never make the world safe for us to be different if nobody knows who we are. People don't understand us.
And now, thinking about the access to services, one thing I learned was that if it isn't there, you make it yourself. So we made these connections.
We have to be nationally organized.
So I founded a nonprofit called the American Educational Gender Information Service.
So here I am, I'm in a meeting that had 71 people show up, and the name of the group became the International Foundation for Gender Education.
The Sherburne Health Centre here in Toronto was just starting out to engage in the trans community. We established the first intake protocol.
So they come to Fanfare, and there are these meetings run by licensed therapists. So many people are helped by it to gain confidence. Great institution.
CHAT, Community Homophile Association of Toronto.
CHAT is where I remember coming in contact with transsexuals for the first time.
I said, are you doing transgendered people? He said, well, I don't know enough about it. So I said, well, I do. I set up the Association for Canadian Transsexuals.
At some point, I published a little squib in the newsletter saying, okay, I'm going public, because I think we need to let people know that we're out here.
The first time I saw anyone like myself, I was 11, and it was a Dean Martin show. He was having a roast, and one of the guests on the roast was Dr. Renee Richards.
Thank you, Dean. It's nice to be here with you and all these ladies and gentlemen and anyone in between.
That was the first person that I identified with, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like her.
when I did the TV shows, I had one that started off bad. Then after I made a couple remarks, the host looked over at me and says, "You're for real." And then he changed his whole tune. And after that, we had a good exchange.
What's the reason you're here? What's the point that you want to make? What's the redeeming social value of this program? Because you've got a lot of folks in the bar out there at the TikTok lounge saying, here we go again with those queers and crazos he's got on his show. Now, what do I say to those people?
The one is that this is one of many expressions of human experience in the world, whether people want to accept it, reject it, pass judgment on it. This is a real part of the world that we live in.
Human Outreach and Achievement Institute is Ariadne Kane's organization. Cross-dressers to have a community of people who share common interests and oppressions, I suppose you could say.
IFGE always had the web. When we opened up the office in Boston, we had a military modem. This was in 1988.
The next thing we knew, the internet came along, and it was 1996 when we went online on the internet. I reached a point where I couldn't do it all myself. It was too big.
It's 1995 we're talking about, and it was very early in the beginning of the internet. And I could have conversations online with people. I discovered that there were cross-dressing clubs. I had no idea there were. In Iowa City, Iowa, there's a cross-dressing club, and we went bowling in drag. And
Well, I've seen that video several times, and I still enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier on that I just want to say is there were a couple of longtime stalwart allies of the community who we also interviewed as part of this interview project. And the two that you saw were Barb Finley and Lynn Fraser. Okay, let's start to the main part of today's webinar. And I'm going to introduce our guests one at a time, and we're going to engage in a little bit of conversation, and I'll introduce the next guest, and we'll have a little more conversation. And then at the end, you at home will also have an opportunity to enter into conversation with our guests. So the first guest is Marcia Botzer. Marcia and I have known each other for a long time, and I have a great deal of respect for all of our guests. Marcia, number one. So Marcia has served LGBTQIA+ and progressive communities for over 45 years. She's served on boards of the U.S. organizations Pride Foundation, Safe Schools, Lambert House, Seattle Counseling Center, and on the board of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. She currently serves on the Martin Luther King County Labor Council Executive Board in Washington State and is a founding member and current commissioner of the Washington State LGBTQIA+ Commission, and also the founder of the very long-standing Ingersoll Gender Center. So Marcia, my first question to you. You are the founder of the Ingersoll Gender Center in Seattle, which is operated for over 40 years now. So in the early days, one way that you promoted the organization was by slipping cards inside of books at the library to let people know that you existed. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to network before social media? And the secondary question, how do you think your perspective on networking today might differ from someone who's only ever known the post-internet world?
Thank you so much. And my deepest thanks for this project. Oh my goodness, it's wonderful. And to be with such colleagues today is just thrilling to me. And thank you all who are out there listening. I appreciate it. And to your question, my goodness sakes, there was just no way to make those communications. You heard some of the words in those clips. And I love the library, still do, always love it. And I was sitting there one day when I saw a book that said Ingersoll on it. And being a laborer, I thought that meant the compressors. Ingersoll is a company that makes compressors, but it wasn't. It was Robert Green Ingersoll, for who I'm eventually named my center. But that also gave me the idea, which carried for a while and then finally bloomed in this concept. There aren't many books about sex or gender in this library, but if I tell them there's a support group through some way, anyone who takes that out might actually find an answer. So put little cards about the emerging support group into those books, and indeed it did work. So I'm glad of that. I'm glad of that. And as to today, with all the possibilities, I am constantly, daily depending upon my colleagues to consider the proper use of communications. It can be, as everyone knows, wonderful and also something of a nightmare. So I think the difference then is we have a world behind us now. We have our voices. We just need to continue to find good ways to present them to the world.
Marcia, thank you for that message, because I do see that we have so many more ways to communicate. And I also see sometimes we fall into some deep holes and don't communicate respectfully to each other, kindly to each other. So I appreciate you using your place in the world to help guide people to use their communication that is so accessible to them in a way that is supportive and building in the way that you did in the past. A second question. In the late 90s, you were, I think, the first trans chair of the National LGBTQ Task Force Board. In your oral history, you talk about the tensions between sexual identity politics and gender identity politics. So I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. And as part of talking about it, talk about how you think things have changed or persisted in regards to navigating that tension between sexual identity politics and gender identity politics. And what do we see today? So kind of tell us about what it was like back then and how much of it is still happening today. And of course, if you have any good advice, we'd like to hear that too.
Oh, no pressure with this question at all.
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
No, you didn't. That's right, you did not. Well, it was my interest to work in the community. And one way in early on was boards and commissions that I'd heard of and other government things. And then that led me to, oh my goodness, there's a couple of queer folks here and there. That led me to work in the emerging, mostly G, but then L and so on, community, which put me in touch with a lot of fine folks indeed, among whom many were willing to have that midnight conversation or that coffee shop conversation about gender identity or what I thought it was all about or what they thought it was all about. So equipped with that over many years, when the opportunity came to join the task force, it certainly met my needs. Grassroots, lots of direct service, inclusive, and I joined. And, you don't just join and find yourself leading a board. That takes time and communication. And thankfully, the same good people, if I can make sort of a composite out of all those years, the same good people that I had those great conversations with long ago were present there in that organization, not the same ones, but you know what I mean. I'm speaking in that particular metaphor. But through those conversations, it became clear that the task force can be a great venue for advancing the needs of folks facing gender identity questions. And indeed, it was. It passed at the board level inclusion policies long before anyone else. Well, shouldn't say that. Very early on. And so I was proud to be there and to do that work. There were opportunities that led on to being an officer and then eventually to chair several times, actually. So that was my method. Now, with so many of us vocal and able to speak directly to leadership and directly to politics and directly to organizations, I favor that. I favor going right there and saying what you need to say. And if you're interested in some group, it makes sense to you, join that thing and make it different. Okay, thanks. Getting a little wound up.
Okay, one more question. As you mentioned, you named your organization the Ingersoll Gender Center after Robert Greene Ingersoll, civil rights and justice advocate from the 1800s. And as I understand it, you did this because of your belief in the importance of recording activist history. So what do you think an exhibit, what impact do you think an exhibit like the Word of Mouth and Trans Activism Oral History Project may have on folks 100 years from now?
History is a very funny thing. You know it better than I do, but who knows? We, at least in the States, are under an amazing attack from opposition, a destructive attack, unlike ones we faced before. So I don't know what the future is going to be. But if there are folks around and they care about being a full human being, let me just hope that when they see this, they will say, my goodness sakes, those folks, they're like me. They struggled and they won and they persevered. They did with the community around them. I hope that's what they say and what they see and what they think. But who knows? In those days, what kind of challenges will they face? I can only hope that they are as strong as my compatriots and everyone watching this thing. Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I'm going to have to move on now. Thank you for those great words. David Harrison is an actor, playwright, and a musician. His eclectic career includes being a professional psychic, a hypnotherapist, and a dominatrix. He has primarily created and toured original work, including his play FTM in 1994, which is based on his first year of transition. The show toured internationally for over 9 years. His ongoing project at the moment is a stage and web series featuring his alter ego 60s rock star named Reggie Wingnuts. Recent work includes his recurring guest star appearance as a Russian spy master, Ivan Stepanov, who he plays opposite James Spader in season 8 of NBC's The Blacklist. So, David, welcome. Pleasure to talk to you again. And so, questions for you. Number one, in your oral history that you did for this project, you talked about your experiences discussing gender on the Phil Donahue and the Joan Rivers shows in the early 1990s. Eventually, you decided to stop accepting interviews like these. So why did you stop? And how big a role do you think the visibility of these kinds of shows played during their time in bringing trans plus people together?
I think they were very useful. And then it got to the point where it was the same thing of the questions tended to be, what was your name before? And have you had the sex change operation? It was very much about the external experience or the titillation factor. And what was not addressed was the internal journey, which for me was most of it. And that's why I thought, I don't want to keep doing this. The last one I did was some talk show in LA, and I was just like, I don't want to do this. If I'm going to be interviewed, I want it to be about my work. But I do think it opened the door. Had that not been there, I thought both Phil Donahue and Joan Rivers were really respectful, while also trying to sort of come from the place of their audience and ask the questions that they would want to know. But in the breaks, both of them said, are you okay? Okay, or call on me if you need help. So I think they were really valuable at the time. And then it And then for me personally, I just felt like I don't want to keep talking about this. It's the same stuff, and it was kind of, I felt sometimes, and the audience were kind of gawking, and I just like, done it, been there, done it, enough. I want to get on with my own work, and that actually propelled me in writing FTM because there was a lack of stories of what the internal process involves, and that show is about the first year of transition and everything that one goes through. And it's it's based on my experience. And that's what propelled me to write that show.
So, David, I'm going to say thank you on behalf of lots of people for both the talk shows and the FTM show. I remember both, and I have heard from people over the years. And we had in the short video you just saw in reference to seeing Christine Jorgensen, seeing Renee Richards, that those folks who were willing to go on those talk shows were really opened the doors for a lot of other people. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for moving on to something that was more introspective and more meaningful in a whole different way. So that's great. Let's try another one. So a large part of feeling less alone is the ability to see and be seen by others like yourself. Now, you've talked a little bit about this, but maybe we can go a little further. How are the limitations of trans plus representation in film and TV, media generally, impacted your ability to see and be seen by other trans plus people in the business?
Well, for a lot of years, I was doing my own work because there really was no place. And also because of where I was in my transition, I couldn't play. There were no roles, trans roles. And there were also I was presenting, as kind of looking a bit like a little boy for a long time. And then that started to shift. And then it became that I wasn't trans enough for trans roles. And it's really mainly been in the last few years. And then my agent actually represents several trans and non-binary people. And so he knows, but I don't get sent out for trans roles. Although I get sent scripts that are, have that as where they want a trans actor they want to engage, but it's really changed in that way that I think casting directors want to be more inclusive now than they ever did. That's really changed. There really was no place before.
So I'm curious about you saying you were not trans enough to get the trans roles. What can you say a little bit more about what that was?
I think when they were thinking trans, they were thinking trans men in maybe 3 years into hormones, or 3 to 5 years into hormones. They were not expecting somebody who's, well, now for me it's been 30 years, and so they didn't think about that. They're kind of thinking of somebody who is kind of straddling the, maybe is not, I don't know, is more non-binary appearing. So that's kind of what it was. Yeah.
I think that we've heard from other people that we've talked to and in Disclosure Film and other places like that, where what the business, the media business wants from trans people is they want trans people who are obviously trans.
Right. Well, many of us are not. Many of us are not. And so I'm kind of, I'm an actor. I've been an actor forever, long before I transitioned. And so that's kind of a way, I want to act. And so I'm going to do whatever. If it's a good role, if it's something that comes my way, I'll do it. It doesn't matter if it's a trans role or, a cis role. I'll even play a woman if they want me to play a woman. You know, I mean, I am an actor. So, I mean, I don't know if that's answering the question.
Right. So, and I'd love to get into a much longer conversation about that, but we'll save that for over coffee the next time I'm in New York.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I'm going to move on to Nikki Ward now. Nikki Ward's decades-long advocacy includes environmental issues and extends substantially into the areas of LGBTQ, disability, human rights, and community. In addition to private sector board experience, Nikki has also served on volunteer boards of public sector, charitable, and institutional organizations. While raising a family in Toronto, she served as a consultant in science and technology sectors before accepting a long-term assignment in senior management with a major financial services company. And Nikki, of course, was one of our interviews. And so, Nikki, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First question to you is, in 2009, you were part of the first unauthorized trans march in Toronto. And in your oral history, you talk about walking the banner out into the street, even though your group did not have a permit to do so. So why was it so important to you that this march not be part of the traditional Toronto Pride Parade?
Well, it wasn't important to me at all. I've been in many unauthorized marches, including many unauthorized trans marches. We actually asked the existing Pride infrastructure for support, which they subsequently denied. So far from running against, as mentioned earlier, you know, the challenge of folks who believe that equity is a scarce commodity, and if they give other people a fair shake, then there somehow will be not enough equity left over for them. And so we marched without the help of what might be considered to be traditional allies. First in 2009, where we were told by Pride Toronto organizers that we would be allowed to march on the sidewalk, which I pointed out we are generally allowed to do on any given day of the week. And there was somebody who had a very large sign with us at the time, and Alex, and I said, Alex, that's a pretty big sign you got there. How big is it? And I just unrolled it into the street, and along with Alex and my partner, Jill, who's here with me, we started walking down the street with cars swerving around us from all directions. So yeah, that was the first one. Subsequently, we again asked for support to take it onto Yonge Street, which in Toronto is the main thoroughfare where you become visible. And as others have said, we were described as either being invisible or exotic. We didn't exist, therefore there was no need to provide special services for us. And subsequently, building on the 2009 experience, I was honored to lead the first march on Yonge Street, where we got somewhere about 5,000 people on the streets and said, you know, we exist.
So that was 5,000 people in the trans march.
Correct.
Oh, fantastic. And when's the most recent one?
Good question. One of the challenges is that as soon as a cause becomes celebrated and a fundraising opportunity, it stops being a march and then becomes a parade. I've marched every year since. It's generally on the Friday before the Pride weekend, but I've always insisted that it be a march for human and trans rights and not a parade, because I don't want to be paraded, and most of my trans friends don't want to be paraded either. We have important work to do, and so that's a very good question.
And how large has it grown to?
Oh, well, now it's become somewhat mainstream. I mean, there are a number of people who are allies, and rather like Woodstock, where, you know, if you ask the number of people who were at Woodstock, it's far more than the number of tickets were issued. I was at the first trans march, and it was, about 100 of us. However, if you ask people now, there's thousands upon thousands. I'm glad people come out to this, and I see families now and supportive parents, which is amazingly, it's good to see, where I'm proud of my trans kids. We've also got also a regular supporter of the Trans March is the leather community in Toronto, who always come out outside of the same leather shop and support. And we got love from them from the day one. It was just,
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to shift us to another piece of your activism. So you were part of the movement for securing gender identity as a federally protected ground in Canada.
Right.
And you were involved in supporting the introductions of bills C-389 and C-279, which is the one that eventually got, and then the one that eventually got passed, which was C-16 in 2016, which I understand you have a signed copy of. And think of the Transgender Archives when you're ready to part with that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So your political contributions continue to this day in the city of Toronto. And in your oral history, you say you became an activist, I'm going to quote you here, to preserve what little dignity you had left.
It's a good line.
Now, looking back now, did you ever think during those early years that it would be possible to end up where you are now?
I didn't think I'd be alive, let alone have any degree of respect or love in my life, or a place to work, or a community, or a discovered family. And my children were taken away from me as a matter of course. And for those who are not from Canada, I was honored to be a significant part of the team that changed our constitution. So it's not just a Supreme Court ruling. We changed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada to specifically include gender identity expression as a protected right. And so I did that at all three levels of government in reverse order, municipally, provincially, which is sort of like on the state level, and then on the federal level. And we did that across party lines. And some of those party lines were pretty firmly entrenched in either denying our existence or having acknowledged reluctantly that we existed, denying us the right to continue to exist.
And I see that you are also running for political office now. So I want to wish you the best in the campaign. We can't actually campaign for you in any active way, but I can certainly.
Right. I just didn't change the backdrop here. I first ran in 2006 because I was being evicted because I came out as trans in a small rural town in Ontario, and there just happened to be a municipal election running at the same time. So I threw my hat in the ring, and suddenly my eviction order disappeared. Sadly, I didn't win, and the day after the election, I got the eviction order again. I'm not running for that reason now. We're running in the center of Toronto with a broad coalition and a significant support. Sadly, in Canada, although we do have theoretically at the constitutional level protection, we don't yet have wonderful people like Andrea Jenkins, who are representing us in a parliamentary position. And so if elected in this election, I'll be, everybody here has done a lot of firsts. I mean, that's something, the first trans woman to do this, the first trans guy to do that. But I'm hoping on this occasion, having run several times, to become the first trans woman elected to significant public office in any major municipality and or parliamentary level in Canada. So,
well, Nikki, thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for that great introduction to the next speaker, who is Andrea Jenkins.
Nicely done. You're welcome, Andrea.
All right, thank you very much. So Andrea Jenkins made history in 2017 as the first African-American openly trans woman to be elected to office in the United States. She's now serving as Minneapolis City Council president. She's also a writer, a performing artist, a poet, and of course, a transgender activist. So Andrea Jenkins worked as a staff member on the Minneapolis City Council for 12 years before beginning work as the curator of the Transgender Oral History Project at the University of Minnesota's Jean-Nicolas Tretter collection in gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender studies. So we have many things to be thankful to Andrea for. So Andrea, I have, of course, a number of questions for you as well. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
So I'm going to first start asking about the Tretter collection. So as someone who led the Tretter Transgender Oral History Project, in collaboration with the University of Minnesota Libraries, You had the opportunity to interview a wide range of Trans Plus community members while taking part in the project. What were some of the ways that you witnessed the trans community finding itself, which is the theme of word of mouth? And were there any stories in particular that stood out to you in terms of how people found each other?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Aaron, again, for hosting this whole program. It is amazing. As some of my fellow panelists have noted already. And thank you for including me in this conversation. With respect to your question, it was my deep honor to initiate the Transgender Oral History Project at the University of Minnesota, which is now moving into its third iteration. And so we're really happy about that. I think I'm proud to say that, phases 2 and 3 wouldn't have happened had we not been successful in our inaugural sort of campaign, if you will. I did interview a host of diverse voices, experiences, and that was one of the reasons why I was really excited about doing the program. I wanted to ensure that we were able to present the diversity of the trans community. And so that project has its majority people of color. 51% of the participants were people of color. A great, geographical mix of people in large cities and communities, as well as rural and, sort of out-state communities throughout the United States and Canada. I'm proud to say, and even had an opportunity to interview some of the people who we've seen on video in this presentation. It's really interesting. There were some themes that really came out. I personally, and some of the things that have been talked about now, my first image of a trans person was Christine Jorgensen at the Chicago Public Library when I was about 14 years old, 15 maybe. And many of the older participants in the project talked about that. But then I was interviewing 18 and 20 and 19-year-olds, and their whole experience was the internet, right? And so they, I grew up in an era where I thought there were no other people like myself, particularly Black trans identified people. And I think, one of the things, and it doesn't diminish the anxiety, the angst, the things that young people are dealing with today, but it's a world where you can almost assume that there's this ginormous population of trans and gender nonconforming and gender expansive and gender fabulous, gender creative people throughout the world and certainly the country. And so that has been some of the difference. But I think one thing that really came out almost to a person, regardless of what the experiences of that initial coming out was, and a lot of young people didn't have a whole bunch of challenges, and many of the older participants had many challenges, right? But one thing that always came out clear, I would say in 99% of the interviews, people express sheer joy and just more comfortability in being and appreciating themselves. And that's, from participants who lost their homes, their jobs, their families, their connections to their children, to people who, like myself, who actually gained. Like when I came out, I think my life improved. Certainly my mental health improved. But I think eliminating that sort of internal barrier of trying to present myself to the world as someone who I wasn't, it allowed me to blossom into a more fuller human being. And I heard a lot of that in those interviews as well.
I will just say that one of the things that I'm starting to see people write about and talk about is moving away from defining us in terms of gender dysphoria and talking about, well, yes, we're unhappy, but you don't change your life so radically unless you expect it to get better. And that there's a whole gender euphoria at those early days of transition, where what's inside of you starts to come out and come forward, and there's this euphoria of I'm finally free. And then, in the long term, there's something people are talking about, just gender joy, just the kind of more quiet, long-term ability to just live your life as it should have been and now as it should be. So thank you for highlighting that. I want to I've got so many more questions I want to ask you about, but unfortunately, we've run out of this piece of time in this piece of it. But thank you so much.
Wow. You're welcome. Wow, I took up my whole 7 minutes. Yay!
Well, I just took up 1 minute of it too, but I hope you don't mind. But no, that was very moving, and thank you very much.
Super. Thank you.
And we will come back to more general questions in a few moments. Our next speaker is Chase Willier. Chase Willier is a Nihia or Cree two-spirit trans man who was adopted out as part of the 60 Scoop in Canada, or in what we call Canada, and grew up in, I don't know how to say this properly, Chase, Silix?
Silix, yeah.
Silix territory, okay. He joined the RCMP in 1979 as the second Indigenous woman to do so in BC. He was out as a lesbian and later identified as two-spirit and trans before he retired in 2010, although he didn't transition until retirement. Chase is married with a young daughter, and he is enjoying more time to pursuing his own creative projects, as well as contracting with Transcare BC and Transfocus, which is keeping him busier than ever. So Chase continues to serve his First Nations people, which is a lifelong commitment that he has kept since he started his journey many years ago. So Chase, thank you for joining us. Once again, you've been an ally of the Chair in Transgender Studies. We appreciate your support. So the tagline of the Word of Mouth exhibit is, quote, how the trans community found itself. So that's our little tagline. And as someone who identifies as both trans and two-spirit, can you tell us how those two aspects of your identity have interacted with one another on your journey towards finding yourself and finding your place in your communities?
Good question. I think a lot of it, well, it certainly is a journey, isn't it? And it's, taken decades to get where I am today in a really good, healthy place and space and loving and living life. So that journey is, for me, it started out with culture and learning my culture. And that's where two-spirit, or learning more about my identity as being two-spirit. But having said that, I identified as a boy, when I was a kid, when I was 4 years old, 5 years old, standing up, peeing at the toilet bowl with my brother Andy. I always said that the only difference was that, he had outdoor plumbing and I didn't. So, but that experience of growing up and into culture and learning from my elders and other First Nations people with the work that I was doing in the communities and eventually coming out as lesbian. But that was not really who I was. I always kind of railed against that word. So it was a real process that took decades for me to kind of come into my own. And a lot of that had to do with the RCMP. I was really closeted in the 80s. I started to figure myself out in the 90s. And by the time I transferred to North Vancouver in 92 or somewhere around there, 93, I was out as lesbian. And so eventually, towards the end of my career, I was using male pronouns when I was in Indigenous or Aboriginal policing services and plainclothes, and people started to kind of figure that out. And I was figuring myself out. And it wasn't really that. It was two-spirit. I was always saw myself as male. But I towards the end of my career, I just could not do this coming out thing anymore in the RCMP and explaining all this stuff. And I'd done it many times before as a Indigenous woman, the first or second, and coming out, queer, lesbian, here we go. So by the time I got to my retirement in 2010, I kind of ran out of gas. And no, I don't feel like explaining myself to everybody and educating them anymore. I'm really tired. So yeah, my identity was all wrapped up into a lot of things, and trans, two-spirit, but culture and identity as a First Nations person is always who I am. And that's first and foremost. And so when I legally changed my name, people made assumptions that it was because I was transitioning earlier. I went from my adopted family's name to Willier and legally changed my whole name. And it had to do with my finding my way home back to my First Nations family in Sucker Creek and asking my aunties to take my name back, my family's name, and it had nothing to do with trans or my transition. It had to do with my identity as a First Nations person, but also as a two-spirit person, because I also had a two-spirit sister from that family. And I had a queer younger brother, bi, who was very much a part of the two-spirit community in Vancouver in the 80s and 90s, who I met so many people. Trans woman, Jamie Lee Hamilton, and I slowly started to kind of, wow, this is really out here. This is great. As I kind of got, into my career in the RCMP later on, where I was feeling comfortable and was able to come out. So,
thank you for mentioning Jamie Lee. I miss her. She was quite a wonderful person.
Totally, yeah.
Okay, so there's stories and thank you for going through that story. The next question I have for you is related to the first one. So the stories told in the Word of Mouth exhibit go all the way back to the 1960s. And, the 1960s is just a very small sliver of the vast landscape that's gender. And we've been using the term two-spirit. It's an English language term. It's a relatively new term, even in English. But two-spirit people and Indigenous words for two-spirit people have been around long before we had words like trans and non-binary. So with such a long and rich history, what's it been like for you to watch and participate in the two-spirit community coming together across all the different nations and finding itself?
It's actually, it's pretty amazing when you see it and feel it. I think for me, with a lot of pride at the national level of seeing our people, it's great amongst the Two-Spirit groups themselves and our people that are Two-Spirit. But when you go to, say, the Assembly of First Nations, AGM, like I did this July in Vancouver with the National Chief, Roseanne Archibald, and they're doing presentations, and they acknowledge in their openings and stuff around, and they'll mention Two-Spirit people as a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Not just our grandmothers and our women, but Two-Spirit people as well. And that there was an agenda item on the AGM around Two-Spirit and Indigenous women's issues as well, and some work that's being done on that. So I am more, I think, I'm excited, I'm touched, but I get very moved when I see that, because I know in that arena, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where, and not negating all the other beautiful stuff that's happening, but when our young people are committing suicide in the levels that they are, far, far above any others, that when our leadership gets that, or where they're starting to make those changes, and it's starting to go into the isolated and rural communities of First Nations people, that where there's Two-Spirit kids, and that's starting to reach them as change or awareness, and the leadership is taking and looking at, and there's things that are coming down, that to me really touches me. I get really moved, because I know that there's that hope that there will be changes within our leadership as well in our First Nations communities, right? So, as well as all the work that's being done by the Two-Spirit people in those communities, and all the other work that's being done as well.
That's really encouraging to hear that that's happening. And thank you. I'm gonna leave it on that encouraging note and move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Chase. So Jules Gill-Peterson. Jules Gill-Peterson, hi again, Jules, is Associate Professor of History at Johns Hopkins University. She's the author of a book known to many, The Histories of the Transgender Child, and is a general co-editor of TSQ, the Transgender Studies Quarterly. Her next book, A Short History of Transmisogyny, will be published by Verso. So thank you for joining us. And my first question is referencing your book, The Histories of the Transgender Child. So in that book, you bring to light the existence of gender diverse kids long before they were given the kind of attention that they receive today. So thanks to representation through mainstream media, the internet, many trans+ youths today are able to find each other online or in person relatively easily. While the younger generation learns from and about one another by sharing information online, what are some of the things that they might gain by learning about the histories of young people like themselves?
I mean, everything. Yeah, it's such an exciting prospect, you know, for all of us who contribute in different ways to making trans histories available. I mean, I can think about it even just in the first person, right? I mean, there is a kind of thirst to understand your place in the world and to some extent your place in history. But I think often, you know, one of the common experiences of youth that maybe gets magnified for trans people and for trans youth is that feeling of like, well, I had to invent my whole existence, you know, out of nothing, pull it out of myself. And, you know, to the degree that you then start to move outward and gain input, you know, whether it's online or in community or from elders or from kinship structures, there's still that kind of initial like, well, I felt like I was facing this on my own, or that I was, the first person ever to go through this. And that might be something people feel at any age, but I'm sure it wears particularly hard on young folks. And so I think it's really fascinating, and it just offers a different kind of perspective to be able to place yourself, maybe not literally, but to understand that people have successfully navigated the situations that you're in 50, 60, 70, 80, as far back as you want to go, but especially, maybe in the last century, when there's something about those stories that really resonate. And I think there's something about that. Of course, it's informational. Of course, it's about, facts and archives and dates, but there's something I also think, spiritual and important about that, about kind of grounding yourself in the world and feeling held by people who you may never get to meet in person, but who can sort of travel with you. I mean, I know as a historian, I often feel that way. The people I write about, however partial my understanding of their lives, however much I've had to be really careful and make choices about how I talk about them, I still feel this profound attachment and reassurance that I sort of walk through the world with their spirit and their legacy.
And you feel like you know them and you've developed a relationship with them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Another question for you. So both the word of mouth exhibit and the transgender archives have little to no content portraying the experiences of trans plus children. So based on your perspective as a historian, how do you see that we can include trans plus kids in the archival process moving forward, especially when so much of what they do happens online and is very ephemeral? It's there, it's gone. So how do we archive their lives and their stories effectively?
That's a brilliant question. It's really tough. I mean, I think there are real concrete questions involved when it comes to, young people's relationship to sort of exposure, surveillance, and visibility in general, right? I mean, I think, for folks, even in my generation, but certainly people in younger generations than me, the sense of privacy or the real power of being opaque or reserving things for yourself has been whittled away, both just by kind of how the media sphere works, but also just the intense degree of surveillance that we face. And that I think really lands very difficultly for a lot of trans folks. It's one of the reasons that, trans youth are so so at risk in the United States right now and in other places. And so I think it's tricky, right? On the one hand, there are days where I just wish, young people at least had the opportunity to control when they want to be, sort of on screen public and when they don't. I mean, I want everyone to have that kind of basic right, but I worry about how much even young people who are activists and who have taken on this work to defend and advocate for themselves, how much they are already under the spotlight. But that being said, I think sometimes something like an oral history interview can be a welcome reprieve from that kind of day-to-day struggle, right? To actually sit down with someone where there's a degree of trust and recognition, and to be offered the chance to tell your own story on your own terms. So I'm sure there are, maybe youth activists, people who already are kind of already in the public, who might want to preserve something in the moment. And I think that would be the real value to me, because I think we can all relate to this. So much of how we understand childhood and youth is retrospective. It's stories we come up with later because there's something about that. There's something weird about childhood as an experience, but also because often we're just trying to survive and make it through something that later we can put words to. And that's an incredible resource, but it only goes so far. When you're on the back end trying to interpret someone's reminiscence of their childhood, you have to be really, really thoughtful and really careful with that. And so there's something just so interesting to think about having young people able to dig into things that are in progress and to also bring the experience and perspective of youth in the present. I mean, I think that would be, frankly, something we don't have a lot of access to or have never even, I'm just imagining Oh, that would have made my book so much easier to write, if that fantasy, right? But just imagine what that would open up for all of us. I mean, I think any of us who have the luck to spend time with trans youth know that, the way they see the world and the way they talk and understand themselves has a lot to teach us. Those of us who have been calcified by adulthood. And so, I would really welcome that. I think it's going to be tough to figure it out in this era that we live in, but it's definitely a question worth chewing on. Yeah, love that.
Thank you. Thank you. So this gives me an opportunity to make a pitch for the Moving Trans History Forward conference, where we do have a youth panel. And we've done that in the past. And you saw in the little video at the beginning about the chair, one of the speakers from the last conference, one of the youth, saying how important it was for them to know that there are trans adults out there who have made successful lives. And if they can do it, so can trans youth. And so, there's a little interaction there. So the next conference, as I said before, is March 30th to April 2nd, and we will have a youth panel. We're also going to have a session where youth and adults just kind of on their own time in their own space will have some structured interaction time to bring together. That's why I mentioned that we're an intergenerational conference as well, because we do also have the elders and the older end of the group and everybody in between. So thank you, Jules, very much for that. I'm going to open it up for questions from everybody else. I have more questions, but I'm looking for what's in the chat, and I see that we have one question, and it is to anybody on the panel. So what advice could you give to someone who is in their 60s and who still hasn't found a community of peers?
I think now the internet is a good option for, connecting with people, finding community. I know sometimes in our 60s, which I am a member of that club, it might feel a little intimidating to get online, but that would be my suggestion. There's a lot of communities, and from all age brackets. Volunteer is another way to get engaged.
Yeah, I'm also in that group of 60-year-olds plus, and I'm waiting to grow up as well. So I think one of the important things to remember is that, I believe, I've never met the people in this before, but I hear the stories and I hear a lot of commonality, and I guess that we might enjoy each other's company outside of here. But being trans, I've always emphasized in terms of my own advocacy, and I hesitate to identify as an activist for a host of reasons, but as an advocate, I always talk in terms of humanity, and that being trans is part of the human experience. So I always encourage people who are looking to find their tribe, to find people with whom they share common interests. If you like riding, hang out with riders. If you like dancing, hang out with dancers. And you will find more relief from isolation by sharing in that environment. And interestingly, there's not a lot, there are no trans women running for city council here in Toronto. I mean, crazy. So as they say in politics, if you want sympathy, get a dog, right? Find people that you like and just being out there and doing what you love and being part of the human experience is about the best and most profound kind of advocacy I think we can do.
Yes.
That's great advice. Yeah.
Excellent comments. My goodness. So I remember the 60s, actually, both of them, pretty well. And what I believe in so deeply still, even at this time, is group support. Any kind of a support group, there's tons and tons of them. Vet them well, of course, check them out. And so many are now virtual that it's very likely something near you. Yes, that would be my thought. Because once you get to listen to those other stories and those kind of venues, things change.
I'm going to just tell you just a short anecdote. that I teach university, and so I'm teaching young people, and I had a visitor to one of my classes who was a high school student and who identified as somewhere on the trans plus spectrum. I don't know exactly where. And they came up to me at the end of the class and they said to me, I am so glad that I was here today because I've never met a trans adult before. It was just like, wow. So that tells us something about how much we need to reach out across those generations. Another question from our people on the web. What role can euphoria or joy play in activism?
Well, I'll kick off answers to that question. It's a lovely question and such an important one. I mean, I think, it's like politics or activism or movement work or organizing can be driven by all kinds of feelings. And, there are a lot of feelings to have these days. I don't think I have to convince anyone of that. But, one of the things that as I try to process the magnitude of the work that, is ahead of or that occupies all of us in different locations, both locally, nationally, internationally, is like, there's a lot to be angry, upset, rage about, depressed about, despondent about. And I think a lot of the feeling of trans hypervisibility, as much as it is our moment of opportunity, is that it's pretty punishing. There's a lot of nonsense out there. It's very hurtful, and it's easy to feel like the work we do affirmatively is actually always in reaction to something negative or something oppressive. And sometimes it will have to be. But I think, joy, pleasure, happiness, enjoyment, solidarity, affinity, those kinds of positive emotions are not just like important, in the kind of in our organismic lives. They can help us think differently and do different things, right? I mean, I think one of the lessons or one of the things I'm always coming back to in terms of advocating for trans folks in the US right now is like, look, we could defeat every single bad thing coming, our way tomorrow, and we would revert back to a certain status quo. But why not meet the enormity of this moment with an affirmative project just as big? What do we have to lose but to dream of a world in which we all are not just sort of protected in a basic way or less at risk than we are today, but actually happy, flourishing, living our best lives, right? And so I think, that's where, to me, those feelings can be guides, right? They let you pursue desire and imagination in ways that pull you outside of yourself, pull you outside of the status quo. And also it's like, those are all social feelings. They link you up to other people, right? And I just think, it's like, I mean, here we are, right? It's like sitting in this virtual room with all of you. It's like, what a brain trust. We all have all the ingredients we need for activism, right here. We don't have to reinvent that wheel, but I think being pulled towards something bigger and better can be really hard to do these days. And so I just, I think the role for it to play is simply to prioritize it when you can, right? To just really dig into that. What is the message that joy brings you to? What are the tactics that joy takes you to? What's the affirmative vision of a world that joy takes you to? And who do you need to link up with to make that real, right? I think that's just, there's something powerful about that. And I think that it's just in short supply, or at least that's how I feel some days. So thank you for bringing that up.
Can I just add just a little bit to that? And
Please.
that was a brilliant response, Jules, really, it was. But, I just think about the reality that as trans people, we have had a vision of who we are, and then subsequently went about manifesting that vision. That in and of itself is something to be joyful about. And it speaks to I think, the determination, the creativity, the adaptation this community and of the individuals that make up this community. And that when I think about the power of that, it brings me joy. And so I think joy plays a role in helping us to continue on the journey. And I'm just going to jump into Jay's next question. It's a journey. It never ends, Jay. For any human being on the planet, we are always continuously growing, developing, learning more about who we are as humans on this planet. And I think that's the same thing is true for the trans plus community.
You know, I think this is probably the best question. They've all been great, but this is probably the best question, you know, for those who are out there and maybe struggling, and that includes all of us, I think. You know, when I was told that I had to submit to a diagnosis for being Nikki Ward, I thought that was a ludicrous proposition. Now, when somebody said that I had gender dysphoria, like I said, I'm perfectly happy with who I am. I'm miserable about how other people treat me. There's a world of difference between the two ideas. The reason I've advocated because other people behave like wankers, right? The fact of the matter is that trans people have been around in many cultures. I come from an Irish tribal condition, and children of the air have been around forever. You know, the whole shamanic experience has always been gender fluid. So to hear some kid in a mental health institute look at me with a straight face and saying, you know, well, I need to diagnose you. It's like, well, how dare you? I think we should be, I suggest, I mean, if you have a choice between joyful or miserable, I'd always pick joy. But when somebody assigns you a diagnosis that you are somehow miserable because of how you've been designed by your higher power, I don't even go, well, I probably shouldn't say because this is going to be recorded, but go to hell, live joyfully. And that is, again, the best human example we can give for others. Laugh easily at yourself, but even more easily at others.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Andrea. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to end on the question of joy. And so, Jason, Marcia, and David, would you like to say a word or two about the role of joy in activism?
Well, I would say that joy and what I love to do, if I go towards that, it naturally helps other people, which is, I find that, and I've kind of had this personal credo of may my greatest joy and what the world needs most come together. And so I think that when I'm doing my acting and when I'm writing, what I'm doing, that I feel that, and my experience has been that art has actually helped people. And then if I'm being my authentic self, then I become a role model of sorts, or I hope to become a role model that other people can look at and change their lives in such a way to do whatever it is that they are called to. But I would absolutely say that joy is sort of the light to follow.
Totally. I beautiful words, everyone. Joy is so much a part of that because we are the human family, and how we approach it, how we see ourselves is so critically important, and service and sharing that and the work that we're doing and setting that intention with a really good feeling in our heart. But some days it's pretty tough to get there. It's a struggle, but when you are your authentic self, and you really hit on it here, David, you have to be your authentic self. And it's in that power, in that empowerment, that when you step out and be that beautiful work that you're doing and holding space and being and embracing and And that power comes through you and speaking truth. And it really is all about that and sharing that. And that's okay. There's days when you can't be, you're 100% and it gets pretty tough. But just walking and setting that intention for the day and, grounding yourself with, as I perhaps, I'll set myself and say my prayers in the morning or whatever, do that. And just kind of walking out in the world, because I don't have responsibility for anything else other than myself.
Yes.
And to keep it simple. And in that, and you can only, the rest of the stuff it's irrelevant for me. I just have to be myself in it and walk out and do that work that the Creator has asked me to do, and to speak truth and to do all those things and walk in a good way and try to be a good human being. And in that work, the Creator leads me wherever I'm going. So I just kind of go with it, go with the flow. And and there's joy in that, because that's where the spontaneity and the love in the world happens. So I don't know if that helps or not, but.
Thank you, Chase. Marcia, you get the last word on this segment.
Oh dear. So agreed. But sometimes joys come small. A group of folks walking, trans folks just going out and walking around in the sunshine together and chatting. That's a great joy. Oh my goodness. Sometimes they come really big, like when we won a law in the state of Washington, when we won over that one recalcitrant vote. Oh my gosh, that was joy. But I'll tell you, I named the Center for Ingersoll because largely one of his quotes, and here it is. The time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. And the way to be happy is to help make others so.
Beautiful, beautiful words to close with. I want to thank each and every one of you, Jules, Chase, Andrea, Nikki, Marcia, David, for bringing yourselves to this panel and to bringing your whole selves to this panel and sharing so much deep thought and wisdom. So thank you very much. Yes. And I also thank Michael and Jay, who behind the scenes have been making sure everything moves as it should and smoothly. There's Michael, Jay. So thank you both for keeping us all on track and making all the parts move properly.